Hello, RAs. Mr. Roberts back with you this, well, it's actually Sunday afternoon for me. For you guys, it may be Wednesday afternoon, or heck, it could be Tuesday afternoon, Wednesday evening. I thought I would take you out into the woods with me today, teach you a few lessons about, well, skills that are important for the woods. I did tell you we'd go over our pack, so I brought my pack, and I thought once we got to our campsite, I would kind of unload it for you, maybe even set up a mock camp for you, give you some tips on that. We're also going to talk a few faith lessons. Going to visit a little bit from the 23rd Psalm. It's one of my favorite scriptures. It tends to be the favorite scripture of a lot of people, especially in times of need, in times of concern. I am at South Mountain State Park, which is about 40 miles from Poplar Springs, up in the southern portion of Burt County, northern portion of Cleveland County. A few facts about this park. I come up here probably 15 or 20 times a year. This is the largest state park in the North Carolina State Park system. It has always been the largest, but recently became even more so with an acquisition of another, oh gosh, third the size of the existing park. Right now, there's probably 45 miles of trail up here. Several primitive backpacking sites. I believe I've camped at all of them, except little river sites, which are new. They've only been here about a year. And actually, as far as accessibility from the trailhead goes, they're some of the closest. I think they're only about a mile and a half. In fact, it's one of the sites that I'm considering bringing you guys to. But anyway, North Carolina State Park System has dozens of parks across the state. I encourage you and your families, make it a goal to try to visit as many of these state parks as you can. It's one of North Carolina's greatest resources. I'm very proud of it. South Mountain State Park, one of the closest to us, but of course, even closer is the Kings Mountain and Crowder's Mountain State Park. It's actually Crowder's Mountain State Park, but it's where we get to the trailheads for Crowder's Mountain and Kings Pinnacle. I encourage you to see as many parks as you can. Get out into God's creation, especially at a time like right now where you've got some time on your hands. I'm huffing and puffing because when you first come out of the parking lot, almost every trail that you take goes straight up the side of a mountain. I'm on the Little River Trail, and it does. It starts climbing and goes all the way straight up for about 2.5 miles. So, we'll put the camera away. Later, when I get to a couple of different views and a couple of different points of interest, we're going to talk more about our faith. All right. First faith lesson, first trail lesson. Sometimes when we're not familiar with an area, we have to trust two things. We have to trust trail blazes. That's what they call these things on trees. These are called blazes. Means helps you blaze a trail through the woods. But also, oftentimes, especially in nice state parks, you have signs. And these signs will point you to your destination. And as long as you stay on the blazed trails, they'll help keep you directed that way. Our faith is like that in the way we find direction from the scriptures and from people that we trust to be mentors, people that know their faith, people that want to teach you about faith, teach you about the importance of your faith. They're like those signs and blazes in the woods. When you're uncertain about things, uncertain about your life, uncertain about what God's trying to direct you to do, find your blazes, find your signs, the people that help point you to God, the scripture that helps point you to God. Talk to Preacher Andy, talk to Miss Nicole, Miss Catherine, especially talk to me, Mr. Jesse, Mr. Joe, Mr. Russell, your moms and dads, people that point you in the right direction in your faith. They're just like those blazes. They keep pointing you the right way. And as long as you stay on them, as long as you follow their direction, you'll be okay. Another life lesson. Sometimes when we don't trust Him, when life is really tough and we tend to doubt God, it's like our lives are a bunch of trees that have just fallen in the forest. They just seem to be random. They just seem to have fallen because they had no stability, no reason to stay up. But in the midst of those fallen trees, look what was created. This beautiful new view that wasn't here beforehand has now been created. I have run and walked this trail 2 or 3 dozen times, and I've never been privileged to see this view before. It's because these trees have always blocked my view. It's kind of like that in our faith. Sometimes we think that God has no purpose for us because we can't see the wider view, the view that He wants to open up to us. We just focus on the down trees in our lives, or the thick trees that don't allow us to see through. When God is trying to point us toward the greater good, the more beautiful view, and He's telling us, don't worry, I'm there with you to open your eyes and to open a path so that you have nothing to worry about. Let me give you a little horticulture lesson here in the wild. These big long leaves, these big bushes, in fact they get big enough sometimes to look like trees, are called rhododendron. Rhododendron. You'll notice them because they have these big long leaves and they have these huge plants. And in about a month, maybe a month and a half, these little buds will develop into flowers. And in mid-May to about mid-June, these things will be blooming white and sometimes pink. They are absolutely gorgeous. Their little cousin, right here beside them, is mountain laurel. Mountain laurel has the smaller leaves. And just like the rhododendron, in a few months, actually a few weeks, these things will be blooming. They'll be beautiful. They'll be pink. They'll be white. Just all part of God's great design and great creation. A forest that looks dead now, in a month month and a half will be vibrant. Green leaves and beautiful flowers and wild flowers on the ground. Again, just part of God's great creation and the majesty that is His kingdom. As we're walking through the woods, preparing ourselves for surviving in the woods, we think about the essentials of life. We think about air, of course, which is all around us. We've talked about shelter, our tents, our hammocks, our tarps. We've talked about layers of insulation, like our quilts and sleeping bags and blankets that keep us warm. We've talked about pads that give us comfort for sleeping. Today, I'm going to teach you guys about one of the most essential components of life, especially on the trail, and that's water. We talked about treating water. We talked about boiling it. We talked about means of treating it. I'm going to show you how I get water out of this stream, filter it, and have nice cold drinking water as a result. This is your typical little mountain stream that's a perfect source. In fact, this one's huge compared to a lot of sources that I get water from. I'll show you how I get it. This is a standard, it's called Life Water bottle. It's just bottled water. This is what I use to collect my water. All I do is just take it down to the stream. I put water in it, and I would normally fill it up, of course, but I'm just doing this for illustration purposes. Then I screw my filter. This is my Sawyer Micro. Screw that white on top of the bottle. And then, if I want to, I can drink straight from it, or I can squeeze it into my other water source. In this case, I have a clean water bottle and a dirty water bottle. And as long as I keep them separated, I never have to worry about contaminating the clean one with the dirty one. It's kind of like that in our faith. God has called us to be in the world, but not of the world. That means He wants us to be a part of the world, but He doesn't want us to do the things that the world does. The world may curse or say bad things about people or family members. It may lie. It may steal. But God has called us to be different from the world. Again, not to contaminate ourselves like the dirty water bottle, but to keep ourselves pure like our clean water bottle. But that's just an example of how I would filter water in the wild. Now, normally I take in fact, I've got a larger bag with me, but I don't use it unless I'm taking water from a water source to camp or someplace like that. But that's how we filter water in the wild. Easy enough. You hear that? When you're in the wild, the sound of rushing water will travel for hundreds of feet, sometimes even hundreds of yards, especially if you're at the top of the mountain heading down toward it. Another way to find water, and I just gave you a key word, it's down. Most of the time, you have natural valleys, natural ravines that lead down to, just like this. You may not be able to see it. That's a natural little ravine that leads down to a water source. And then the third way that I found it a lot is oftentimes you see a lot of green around water. And that's obvious. Water is a source of nourishment for all things, especially plant life. So if you're looking for water, listen for it. Look down at the bottom of a ravine or the bottom of a valley and look for the greenery in life. You know, Jesus compared Himself to living water. He told us that if we have His water, we'll never thirst again. That's the message He gave to the Samaritan woman. You know, Jesus taught us so much in His relationship with the Samaritans. He taught us to love no matter how different people are from us. And He chose someone like the Samaritan woman to reveal himself as the living water. We know that water brings us life. It refreshes us, it cools things down. Sometimes it's a great place for entertainment. Water is a fundamental necessity of life, just as Jesus is for us that profess him as Lord. All right, heading back up the mountain. More life and faith lessons to come. All righty. We're going to head down to the Sawtooth campsites. And I'm going to show you how to set up camp. And it just occurred to me that I've had my camera oriented portrait instead of landscape this entire time. I apologize for that. I'll try to remember to keep it landscape the rest of the trip. Now let's talk a little bit about fire. See how charred these trees are? These trees, how dead and charred they are. Back in November of 2018, this area had a really large wildfire. Destroyed thousands of acres up here. Now when I say destroyed, it doesn't mean it fell off the face of the earth. It just means most of the trees, undergrowth, everything else was kind of burned away. But some of the trees survived. You can see they didn't all die, of course. And look at this. Look at all the brand new pine saplings that are growing. This is God's way of clearing out the old so the new will come. That old fire, the fire had to burn out the old growth that was just clogging and choking the life out of the forest. It was so thick and probably so full of older, less thriving, less lively trees that it just couldn't grow properly. That's just the way our lives are. Sometimes we have so much junk in our lives, so much stuff preventing us from growing, that God says, I gotta burn that out of there. It's what we call the refining fire. When you take all the junk out of your life, burn it away, throw it away, get rid of it, so that you can have a new life. It's what Paul said in 2 Corinthians 5:17. If anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed, and the new has come. That's what our lives are like when Jesus takes over. All that old junk in our lives doesn't matter anymore. It's just the new. It's just the ability to see life through his eyes for the first time, and to realize no matter how difficult life is, how choked it might be with worry and fears and concerns, he's always there to give us a new life and a new path. We're almost to campsite. Set up camp quickly, let you guys see what everything is used for. We're going to talk a little bit about choosing a campsite, and then we'll go back. I've got a couple of other views I want to show you, and we'll be done. All right, these are the Sawtooth Trail campsites. As you'll notice, most of these campsites have a picnic table. They've got a nice fire ring to make a nice fire that has a big grate that you can drop over the coals, and you can cook stuff off of there. In fact, I've used them for that before. Miss Pam and I were camping at one of these, not this side, but a site similar to this a few years ago. And I made steaks and potatoes for us over a campfire. It was pretty good. Last year, I posted a video, or maybe it was 2 years ago, of an overnight up here. You want to search my site. I made a pancake breakfast on that picnic table right there. Over there For those of you that don't think you want to go potty in the woods, that's what we call a privy. The old folks would call that an outhouse. But that's just basically a hole in the ground with a toilet seat on it for you to do your business in, so you don't have to dig a cat hole and poop in the woods. Miss Pam loves the privy for that reason. She can't stand going in the woods. Let me point out a couple of things over here. It's kind of unique to this campsite, or unique at least in this area. We have bear boxes here. And a bear box is just a place where you can store your food at night and not have to worry about bears getting it. And you just open it, put your food in there, and close it up. That way, you don't have to hang your food. And one of these days, I'll teach you how to hang food. But let's go back up. I'm going to go up to this side up here because that's the one where I was last time. These sites are basically all tent sites. There's an obvious reason, because you don't see any trees, right? I couldn't hang my hammock out here. However, behind this side up here in the woods is where I camped the last time. And there's actually some trees here where I was able to hang my hammock. Right down in this area. What I wanted to talk about was choosing a campsite in the woods. Now these aren't the world's greatest examples because, as you can see, my camera is basically level there and the ground sloping way to the left. You never really want to choose a campsite that's sloping because you will slide down in your sleeping bag and in your tent all night, and it is not comfortable. So you want to try to choose a site, first and foremost, that's level if you can find one. This is the closest thing to basically almost level around here. So if you wanted to, you could kind of stick it right there. But remember what I told you about trying to make sure there were no dead trees above you, what we call widowmakers? Look at all the dead trees, dead tree limbs above us. Now none seem to be in danger of falling, but look, got a lot of dead trees there. Kind of dead trees all around us. You got to be careful of those dead trees because at night, if those things are really hanging and dangling, they can fall right on your tent and could create serious injury or even death. But let's not talk about that. One other important thing, you never want to put your tent in an area that's going to collect water. So in this area, the water would probably rush down to some of these low-lying spots. I'll show you right over here. If I were going to put a tent up in this campsite, I would definitely not want to put it right there. That's a low site, a low spot, and water would rush to there, and it would basically flood your tent out if your tent were sitting there. I know a lot of people probably put it there or there because those areas are flat and sandy, but a better place to put it would be up here on top of this hill, so the water would rush down away from it and not into your tent. So that's a little lesson on how to set your tent up. Now we're going to set up camp. Fortunately for us, we have this really nice picnic table. That's very unusual. Normally, I just have to throw my pack either down on the ground, or I have a string that I use to hang it from a tree. But I'm going to show you how we're going to set our camp up. Alrighty. When I get here, I've kind of checked around. I've made sure that there's no sticks or rocks or anything that might pierce my tent bottom. I made sure it's good and level. I've made sure I'm not in an area that's going to collect water. So the first thing I'll do, go through my pack, and I'll just kind of bring everything out that I'm going to need and stack it nearby. I've shown you this piece of plastic before. I keep that piece of plastic in my pack. That's what I use to put all my equipment on so it doesn't get wet. But I've got my electronics bag, got all my chargers, got all my cables in it, it's got some electronic stuff. There's the first aid kit that we went over last week. Here's my X mug, collapsible mug. That's for drinking coffee or hot chocolate. This is my poop kit. It's got my poop trowel, my toilet paper, wipes, hand sanitizer. This is my towel that I use for drying things. If I have to kind of wash off, I'll use it for that. A little bit of everything. My tent stakes. And here's that bottle I was telling you about earlier. If I'm going to carry water back, in fact, if I were going to go down, there's a water source about 1/4 of a mile from here. I would take this down to the water source and fill it up, and then I would just bring it back in this, and then I would use that to filter my water. And then, inside my backpack, there's my cook kit, and I'll show you the contents of that in a little while. This is my food bag. I don't have a lot of food in there. This is just really for illustration purposes. This is what I carry my food in. Then I've got my tent, and on the side of my pack, my tent poles. I'm going to set it up quickly, and then I'll take it down quickly, and we'll talk a little bit more about what else is in there. And for illustration purposes today, I'm not going to set up my ground cloth. I normally do set up a ground cloth, but I won't do that today. Alright, two parts of my tent are my tent and my rain fly. This is the tent, of course. Might help if I had it right side up. Get my poles up. They go together in one big assembly. In fact, I got to do some work on this. These things have gotten stretched over a period of time. Now they're not good and tight. I got to come back in here and tighten these things. If I were going to take this out on the trail, this would be a real inconvenience. Definitely time. Right, neat thing. All right, for illustration purposes, or for brevity's sake, I'm not going to set the whole thing up. Remember, the rain fly goes on top, vestibules go up. Next thing I'll do is get my pad out and blow it up. Let me do that in just a second. Here's my gloves. Then inside my pack, inside my liner, which is basically a trash compactor bag, I keep anything I don't want to get wet. That's my puffy. That's my down jacket. That's my pillow. And last but not least, most importantly, is my quilt. This is just, now I wouldn't bring this one normally tonight. This is a 20-degree quilt. It's not going to be nearly cool enough to have to worry about that. But of course I'm not staying here anyway. So that's what I would sleep in if I were sleeping in a tent. My pad, my quilt. Sometimes I'll keep some clothes on. Then I put my rain fly on. And then, once I finish setting that up, I'd get my cook kit out. And my cook kit is inside this little bag, keep everything together. And inside my cook kit, I keep a bandana, which is basically just like a pot holder, lighter. This is one of my stoves. This is an MSR Pocket Rocket Deluxe. Cool thing about this stove, it's got this great concave so that it prevents wind from blowing it out. Then my fuel. I would take my fuel out. Now your stove arms just swivel and set up. And I would take my stove, make sure your gas is off all the way. Then I turn the gas on. And the cool thing about this stove is it's got this little igniter. So once I turn the gas on, all I have to do is hit the igniter and I've got flame. Probably can't see it because it's so clean, but there is a good strong flame right there. You can hear it. And I would just put water in my pot, put my pot on top of it, boil my water, and I'd be ready to eat in about 2.5 minutes. Turn it on. I can turn it down if I want to and let it sit there and just simmer for a while. Now I've got it turned off. Then I would take my water, my warm water, and take some of my food, like rice and chicken, which is my favorite. And I would pour the water into this bag, stir it up, and in about 9 minutes I'd be ready to eat. This is some freeze-dried chili. Do the same thing with it, just pour the water right in the bag. One of my favorites, mashed potatoes. All those things I make with just hot water. And then sometimes I'll put some chicken with my mashed potatoes, and that will be an entire meal. Good stuff. I'll talk about this in a second. Okay, just a couple of other things. You can see I've got everything packed up. One of the last things you want to do before you leave a campsite, check your campsite. Make sure it didn't leave anything behind. Most of the time, you're going to have some pretty expensive gear with you, and you want to make absolutely certain all that gear is secure. So check on the ground. If you had a picnic table, check on the picnic table. I did want to say too, there is a water source. Let me see if you can see the sign down there that says water pointing that direction. I don't think you can see it. Anyway, one thing about water sources you want to be really careful of is you don't want to be the source of contamination for a water site or water source. That means always stay at least 100 to 200 feet away from water source when you're going potty, whether that's doing number 1 or number 2. Better yet, use a privy if you can. If you don't have a privy nearby, again, at least 100 feet, preferably 200 feet from water source, doing number 1 or number 2. Same thing for a trail. You never want to do number 1 or number 2 within 100 or 200 feet of a trail. All right, we're getting ready to get back on the trail. I'm going to hit it pretty hard to the Chestnut Knob overlook. I want to show you that view. It's beautiful. And then I got to get out here. Miss Pam is expecting me back. Okay, guys. This is what I like to call the money shot. Prettiest spot in the South Mountains State Park. This is the Chestnut Knob Gorge. We're on Chestnut Knob looking down into the gorge itself, carved out by the Jacobs Fork River. And if we could see through the trees, right through there, kind of at 12 o'clock, the High Shoals Falls is right over there. Off in the distance, I don't think you can make them out, is King's Pinnacle on the right and then Crowder's Mountain on the left. Going on to the left of that on the horizon, Spencer Mountain, which is right there in Gastonia. Directly in front of us, that little prominent knob is Carpenter's Knob, famous for the Bigfoot legend of Nobby. Prettiest spot up here. I wish it were prettier and you could see. I wish the hawks were flying. Miss Pam and I come up here quite often. It's one of our favorite spots up here. You hear the water? The base. That's where you could find some water to drink if you needed it. All right, one more shot and we'll be done. All righty. Last view. It's the Jacobs Fork River Gorge Overlook. And right out there, are the High Shoals Falls. For those of you that have ever hiked up to the falls, that's what they look like from across the mountain. And that, as they say, oh, by the way, the big white rock that you see as you're hiking up to the falls, right there. I'm not advocating that you climb to the top of that, but it's actually pretty cool. And that's pretty much what I wanted to show you today. Wanted to give you some idea of what the trail looks like from my perspective, but also the perspective of someone that's always looking to see what God might be trying to tell him. Yes, I stumble a lot. Yes, I have a lot of fears. I have a lot of doubts. But when I remain focused on God and His creation, I am reminded of how truly great He is, how truly insignificant I am, and yet how much He dearly loves me. So as you go through this week, remember His great love for you through His creation. Get out in nature as much as you can. Practice the skills that I've been teaching you. Practice setting up a camp. Practice boiling water, filtering water. Practice learning where to set up your campsites. Practice all that you can to make yourself self-sufficient in the woods. It is so critical that you be prepared. Remember, as you head through life, God desperately loves you, and so does Mr. Robert. Talk to you soon.